Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang Dhammang Sanghang Namasami. What is fear? Fear is another form of suffering. And if we can understand the cause of suffering, we can go some way towards liberation, freedom from suffering. So what is the cause of fear? In order to ascertain its cause, one must try and identify what it is. Now, one can recollect the most recent or previous occasion that you experienced fear. What led up to it, what happened during it, and what happened after it. And from that, you will see how things begin, arise, stay for a while, and then pass away. But fear, where does it come from? Fear is born of the mind from uncertainty and clinging to life without emotional or physical pain. But life is uncertain. There is emotional and physical pain resulting from inevitable aging, sickness, and death. And it is what we cannot control. It is uncertainty of the future. It is the fear of pain, sickness, death. It can also be irrational. A spider may not be able to harm you. It could be non-poisonous, and it should fear you, being as you're considerably larger. But it is a common thing, arachnophobia, the fear of spiders. Coming from, I understand, the main cause being their ability to move slightly more quickly than the human eye, and therefore you not being able to see quite where they are, creating uncertainty, and in uncertainty there is fear. But really, fear stems from ignorance, not appreciating the characteristics of existence. Whatever we're faced with, whatever's coming up that scares us, that we're frightened of, that produces this mental emotion of fear and its corresponding physical feelings. Because all mental emotions have their corresponding physical feelings, as do physical feelings such as pain have corresponding mental emotions. Nama, rupa, mind and body. This is what we are. But we believe everything our minds perceive, and we believe everything our bodies feel to be true, rather than perceptions, creations from our own memories and our own imaginations, from what we're seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting and touching. We create thoughts of imminent harm coming to us, death even. Ultimately, the fear is in uncertainty. The fear is not in death itself. We know we will die. We are not immortal. And it's this understanding, this is why it is so important in the teachings of the Buddha to understand these three characteristics of existence: anicca, impermanence, everything is impermanent; dukkha, unsatisfactoriness, everything is unsatisfactory, largely as a result of its impermanence; and anatta, not self, out of our control. Now, if we're in a car driving along and the brakes don't work, fear would arise because we're unable to control the vehicle. And that's a tangible way to understand what is happening with this emotion of fear as it arises in the body. It is like having the brake cables cut or the rudder broken on a moving yacht, because you're unable to see where you can control your next point, your destiny that you like to think you have. You had something mapped out, something planned, and all of a sudden anicca has reared its ugly head, this characteristic of uncertainty, not knowing what's going to happen next. Now, rather than accepting that as normal, which after all it is normal. If we could predict everything that was going to happen next exactly, then there should be no concern, there should be no worries, there should be no fear. Technically, if it wasn't for greed, there would be no economic problems, because everything, every eventuality could be planned for. But of course it is not like that. And if it was like that, there would be greed. So it still wouldn't work. So with our understanding that we will experience fear as a result of uncertainty, we immediately begin to reduce the effect that that fear has, that emotion has, in terms of its corresponding physical feelings of, say, shortness of breath, fast beating heart, temperature rising, sweating, the fear, the tendency to wish to run. Now, of course, fear comes about as a human instinct in order to protect ourselves. So it isn't a bad thing. We don't want to be so fearless that we approach everything carelessly, heedlessly. Because not only are we putting ourselves in harm's way, we could be bringing along others into harm's way also. So even if we cannot avoid fear, which we cannot if we have a tendency towards fear, if we can understand it is just an emotion, an emotional response to uncertainty, then it certainly loses its potency. So, if it is not an emotional response to uncertainty, what is it? It isn't, is it? It is only an emotional response to the unknown, a reaction in the mind to not knowing what's coming next. If you absolutely knew that someone was going to bang a hammer on your finger in the next 3 seconds and it was going to hurt, there would be no fear. If you absolutely knew that's all that would happen, it would hurt for a little while, but the finger would be ultimately okay, because you would brace yourself. It will be painful, it will be unpleasant, and there would be a feeling, an emotion of aversion. You wouldn't want it, but you would have no fear because you knew this was going to happen. You've got a contract, a statement, I'm going to hit your finger with a hammer, like when the doctor says, now you'll feel a short scratch, and you know you're going to have that scratch when you have your inoculation or vaccination or injection or give some blood, whatever it is you're doing with a pin, and you're braced for it. Now this may create some anxiety, some anticipation, some aversion, but it is not fear. You know what's happening. But if someone comes waving a hypodermic needle at you like this, that they've picked up from the gutter in the dodgy part of town where there are drug addicts and all sorts, and they're coming at you like this, and they might scratch you or prick you with this, and you don't know what's happening, you would have fear, justifiably. Or if someone's yielding a hammer randomly like this, you would have fear because you don't know what's going to happen. The same scenario, but you do not know the outcome. Knowing the outcome is a different emotional response. So we apply our knowledge of every outcome to each and every situation we find ourselves in that may cause us to feel fear. By simply understanding that we are aging of a nature to get sick and die, and it could be our time is up now with what is about to happen. Or it could be that the boss has asked us to go into the office because something has happened and you could be about to lose your job. And fear for your livelihood is there. How am I going to explain this to the family? What am I going to do next? All as a result of uncertainty. And then you walk into the office and somebody else has been given the sack and you've been given a promotion. Uncertainty, it wasn't what you were expecting, and you feel joy. But that's not right either. What about the poor person who lost their job? So we need to actually develop something a little bit more than just a resistance to fear. We need to not try and be brave, not try and be strong and say, oh, I'm not scared of this because I know I'm going to die anyway. Because that is carelessness, that is heedlessness. And that isn't going to give you long-term fearlessness. You'll constantly be straining against your natural human instinct to be scared. By using a technique, yes, that works, yes. But I'm using that to illustrate what fear is. How we can really develop fearlessness is by giving. Not giving money, not giving things, not really even doing service as a form of giving, but by giving the greatest gift you can give, and that is of fearlessness. You give the gift of fearlessness. Abhaya means fearless. A is always not, or the opposite of something positive, non, and bhaya is fear. So fearlessness, abhaya, is a gift we can give. How? By not being scary, not giving any beings, anyone, anything, cause to fear you. And how? Through keeping simple sila, moral precepts, which all 5 come together to mean do no harm to yourself or to others. So firstly, by doing no harm to yourself and ensuring that you keep it that way, you'll not be dragging other people into harm's way with you. You'll also be living your life carefully, along with mindfulness, but just keeping sila is enough to start to develop mindfulness, in that you are having to be aware of your moral virtue. You have to think before you make any actions of body, speech or mind, in order to ensure that you won't either be killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, lying, or taking any intoxicants. With that in the back of your mind also, always, you are ensuring you can do yourself no harm. And of course it's also ensuring you will be doing no others any harm. And the one good fear we can have, and I mentioned it yesterday, are our 2 guardian angels, for want of a better way to describe them, because they're not actually people, but can be depicted as such. And they're called Hiri and Ottappa. Hiri, H-I-R-I, and Ottappa, O-T-T-A-P-P-A. Think of them as angels standing by you. And it's nice to have angels standing by you. This helps with fear, doesn't it? Hiri means the fear of breaking any of those precepts. So using fear to describe Hiri is a bit negative, because it's a good kind of fear. Because you've really understood those precepts to the extent that you fear even accidentally breaking them without intention. But that really does help to ensure that your intention is always not to break any of those precepts. So that's Hiri. And Ottappa is the fear of the consequences that will arise as a result of breaking any of those precepts. If you like, the karmic effect. So any actions of body, speech and mind that go against the precepts, break the precepts, will have consequences, either immediately, in the future, or even in another lifetime. You could be even suffering as a result of karma from a previous lifetime. But whatever, you are not creating fearlessness either in yourself or in others if you break the precepts. So if you keep Hiri and Ottappa in mind as figures to remind you of your own control, the control you do have to some extent, and that is to keep sila, to keep the precepts, not to kill, steal, sexual misconduct, lie or take intoxicants, then you've got continual reminders to be safe. And where you are safe, there is no harm. And you, in turn, are giving that gift of fearlessness to all beings. It is very evident, living here in this forest, that it is a monastic forest where only monks and some lay people who are dedicated practitioners live, stay. Some come to work, some come just to wander. All of the animals here, very wild creatures, snakes, lizards, scorpions, spiders, every creature imaginable that's here, monkeys, they don't run away. They just come up to you and watch you, and there's no fear, because they know they will not be harmed. For decades or generations now of people have been coming here whom cause no harm to all beings. So it's become established, it is evolved as a place of fearlessness. And that is sensed, that is felt, that is known. And you can give that gift also. Now, apart from that, also tends to direct you into more wholesome situations. That tends to guide you away, get you out of troublesome paths, directions you could be going in, whereby you may face adversity, face situations whereby you could be scared. Apart from that, if and when you do, you know your greatest fear is breaking those precepts, because you know that will have unequivocal consequences. Anything else that can happen to you outside of that, although it can still be feared, will only result in what is certain anyway. At worst, death or some suffering. This is going to happen anyway. We can also take some refuge. We can take we can feel the protection of those Brahma Viharas that I've also mentioned previously in a recent talk, of metta, loving kindness, karuna, compassion, mudita, sympathetic joy, so joy for others, and equanimity, called the Brahma Viharas, or the godly abodes, because if we dwell in those, if we develop those, these aren't things we don't do metta, we don't do compassion, they don't have to be actual acts of going out and caring or giving, although these are very good also. You can still develop the quality of loving kindness, develop the quality of compassion, the quality of mudita, and this quality of equanimity, upekkha. We develop those qualities by our practice of meditation and by keeping sila. They will develop naturally. We don't have to think about it. I label them, I name them, we talk about them to bring them into the foreground for identification purposes, in order for us to understand like we've described fear, then the antidotes, how to deal with fear. If you know you predominantly abide through the maintenance of sila and through the practice of samadhi in these heavenly realms of compassion and loving kindness and joy for others, then these are realms, these are places of fearlessness where there is no fear. Like a comfort blanket for a child whom is scared of the dark. But given their favourite teddy or their comfort blanket, they're okay. The fear goes. So you have these tools. Well, you have these comfort blankets, these teddy bears of Hiri and Ottappa, the 4 Brahma Viharas. And as long as you're keeping sila and you practice some meditation, your fear, even when it does manifest, will be so much more reduced. Because uncertainty is no longer something to be feared. In fact, uncertainty is as certain as it gets, because the one sure thing is that nothing is sure. It is certain that everything is uncertain. And that is how we reduce fear. So, if we take our nama, our mind, rupa, our body, and we tend to go around with this as one thing, which we call ourselves. And of course, it is ourselves that we are getting away from in order to really understand this true nature of existence, being that of anatta, non-self. When we separate them slightly, and we see that fear isn't actually coming from the body, it is coming from the mind. It is mind-made. But it is about the body. You don't fear somebody's going to come and harm your mind, although they really can do that more easily than your body, I think. But you fear that people are going to come and harm your body. There's an expression in England we heard as growing up children: sticks and stones can hurt my bones, but words will never hurt me. Now that's not quite true, but it was something that was given to children when they were called names to say, oh, you know, just ignore it. And of course you should. If someone calls you a dog, fine. They've called you a dog. Have you got a tail? No. Do you bark? No. Are you furry? No. It doesn't matter. If someone cuts you with a knife, then you have to go to hospital. It matters. But we have this grey area, this blurred area between nama and rupa, mind and body. And by just slightly, not necessarily separating the two, but knowing the two from the point of view of the observer, that which experiences all experiences of mind and body, you can take yourself one step away from it, one step away from the situation, and neither be affected by mind or body, but able to dwell, to live, to abide in a place of security, in a place of refuge, in a place of protection, away from whatever is creating fear. Now I was trying to think of the last time I experienced fear, and it was a bit of a tall order, a bit difficult, because I couldn't think of anything. And I say this because I suggested at the beginning you should think of the last time you experienced fear and see how it arose and what happened afterwards. And really, I think the last time I experienced fear was I did nearly drown when I was in India. Just to cut a long story short, I went into the sea and got washed out in a very serious current. And I can swim, so it's no problem, but there was no way I could swim against this current, and it was looking pretty much like I wasn't going to get back to the beach. And eventually I had to just let go of this whole situation that I was in and accept that there was nothing I could do about it. And then I was able to just relax, lay on my back, which wasn't the wisest thing to do because of the sun. It was very, very hot and it was burning almost instantly. But I knew that was it. I was going to just die anyway in this situation. But I can't say that fear stayed for long. There was a moment of fear when I realized I was going out to sea very quickly in the wrong direction, and I was unable to swim against it, and I was losing my breath. And the immediate reaction to that fear was to try harder, swimming harder. An impossible situation. But I quickly realized that no, you can't do anything about this. And by which time I could see the beach was very small, and I just allowed myself to float. And I was then brought around where the sea goes to where a river comes out and the current changes, and I got equally quickly washed into shore at the very far end of this long at least 2 or 3 kilometers of beach, into a very sort of barren area, but it was ground. It was the beach, and I was just a little bit sunburnt, and my robes were at the other end of the beach. There were no people anyway, otherwise I wouldn't have gone into the sea, but I was able to get back. But there was this moment of fear. Now, if I look back on that, what happened when this moment of fear arose? I did the wrong thing. But when I realized that there was nothing I could do about it, I had to let go of the fear and just do nothing. Prepare myself for the inevitable death that I could see was not far off. Then I stopped struggling. I restored some energy. The panic went away. I mean, it was a little bit of fear, a little bit of panic there, but it quickly went away when I stopped trying. And you will see also, looking back, any situations whereby there was fear, really deep fear, you're here now, aren't you? Recollecting that situation. It couldn't have been that bad, otherwise you wouldn't be. And if they are irrational fears, then similarly, look back, what has a spider ever done to me? You can say. I mean, if it's a poisonous creature, then you keep away from it. But you can look back and see, yes, this is an irrational fear. So where is fear? What is fear? It is all there in the mind. mind-generated about our concerns for this body, which after all is imperfect anyway, will let us down eventually. You may have fear for other people. You may say, oh yes, but I fear for my baby, I fear for my family. Yes, justifiable compassion, general sympathy. We do fear from our loved ones, but not meaning to sound cruel, not meaning to sound facetious, but that really is because you don't want to lose them. You're fearing loss yourself. You're not fearing that this family member will die. You're fearing the consequences of that family member dying on you, or them coming to harm and having pain. You're fearing, really, the underlying fear is coming from a sense of you suffering as a result of you being out of control, unable to protect them, to do something to help them. So it's coming back to you again. So you do all you can do to help without the fear. Because even if it's externally, or seemingly externally generated, it isn't. It is always fear, it's always internally generated. Ghosts, monsters, scary wild animals, anything in the dark, things that go bump in the night. Do any of these things really harm you? No. Lots of things go bump in the night here, and there are lots of scary animals. Probably ghosts, I don't know. Haven't seen any. But can they do anything? Well, if they do, they do. Do you want to sit up all night fearing this? No. So it isn't that difficult to reduce fear when you reduce it down to its components, what it's made up of and what it is. And it is really just uncertainty. And that is all around us all of the time. So I think that's what I needed to say with regards to fear. Generally, the practice is about the development of wholesome mind states and the reduction of unwholesome mind states. Often people say, oh, I was so scared going to bed last night, I'd sat up late and watched a horror film. Well, you know, this is quite an irrational statement, or an irrational idea even, isn't it? To put yourself through this artificial form of negative sensory stimulation. But people do it all of the time. But in a way, it's a good way of showing you how easily we trick ourselves, how easily we fool ourselves. I often hear this story about people, forest monks, fearful of snakes, seeing what they think of as a snake only to be a piece of rope. And, oh, what was I fearing? I can't really think how the story goes. But I was thinking of this the other day. Whenever I'm walking along these forest paths, it's never a piece of rope. Yet another one today. It's always a very big python, or cobra, or any kind of snake. It's never rope here, just snakes. So it's a good job there's no fear there. I mean, whether I would have had fear of snakes previously in my previous life in this life, as a business person, if a snake had come into my house then, back in England, I don't know, 20 years ago or so, maybe if a snake had been in my living room, I might have been quite freaked out. But here, no. Not at all. It would be quite difficult to live here if that was the case. I've got to quite like all of the animals here. They're my friends in nature. They are such a good way to develop the Brahma Viharas of metta, loving kindness, and compassion, because they're suffering. They have such fragile existences. All of the creatures here have predators, and we are their worst enemies. We have to be so careful walking around. Only last evening or early this morning, such a tiny gecko on the concrete path just down here that even with bare feet, if I stepped on him, he would have squashed fatally very quickly. But he moved so quickly, he got out of the way. But you could easily harm such a dear little creature. And then what happens? Hiri and Ottappa come in. Hiri saying, "Oh, you've broken a precept. Have you broken a precept? Or it wasn't intentional? Or could you have been more careful?" And then Ottappa comes in. "Oh, look, what's going to happen now? All this consequences. Now you've killed a gecko. You're going to have to spend 15 lifetimes or 150,000 million lifetimes as a gecko," or something like this. I don't know. You get these wholesome fears. This is fears that are generating wholesome mind states. They're reminding fears, reminders. They're helping you to increase your mindfulness. Anyway, I digress. I've started to go on a little, and I'm sure the time is up. I did have a clock with me, but it's gone off. So I'll guess that we're around 40 minutes and hope I'm right. Sampitiyo vivajantu sabbarogo vinyasatu mate bhavatu vantarayo sukhi digo yuko bhavam.